The Miami Dolphins' interesting offseason gets a little bit weirder with the wrinkle that they could be moving on from Jonnu Smith. Adam Schefter reported that they sought out a trade partner and had been talking with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It seems that Jonnu Smith wants more money from the team. Miami might not be willing to meet his number, and he could be on the move. But I'm not here to talk about the money. Regardless of whether this move happens or not, I think it kind of signifies something that has been happening with the team the entire offseason, and that is a desire to shift back to their 2023 selves. And I mean that from a personnel perspective and the kind of team that they seem to be putting together on offense. See, the best version of the Mike McDaniel Dolphins team has been the 2023 one, especially towards the beginning of that season where they had a good bill of health. And I think a large part of that, at least what Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer see it as, is their ability to dominate out of single tight end sets, and the fact that they were able to run so many one tight end looks, whether it be 11 or 21 personnel. Those two personnel groupings dominated their 2023 percentages. They were over 80% of their plays simply out of those two personnel groupings. And while those numbers still were around 68 to 70% in 2024, that is a bit of a drop off, and it kind of shows when you watch the games. Miami wasn't nearly as in control of games from beginning to end. They weren't able to manipulate personnel in the way that they'd hoped, and they weren't able to run the ball, or honestly, late in games, pass the ball effectively because of it. They didn't have the same ability to dictate what personnel the defense came out in, is because they couldn't dominate from those sets. And when you think about those two specific personnel groupings, 11 and 21 personnel, Miami has done their part this offseason to attempt to improve each of those groups. I think that when you look at 21 personnel, they have their fullback already, if that's the way that you're going to go. And they also have their running backs in Devon Achane and Jalen Wright. But think about a single tight end on the field. This is somebody who needs to be an inline wide type player who can block. And the hope was that it would be Julian Hill last season. And that obviously didn't work out the way Miami had hoped. They're still hoping for more development from him. He is somebody that I think will play a real role on this roster. But if it doesn't work out, somebody to look out for is Pharaoh Brown, who they just signed and is much more of a traditional Y, and somebody who, might not be the best receiving target, but can still help you dictate personnel. And the fact that he's a heavier guy adds a gap to the run game and is going to be a respectable run blocker and pass protector. And on top of that, when you go to 11 personnel, and maybe you have Devon Achane and Pharaoh Brown, and now you have a third wide receiver, they also brought somebody in who kind of would fill Jonnu's role there. If you're going to move from 12 personnel looks to 11 personnel looks, shockingly, Miami sort of upgrades in the blocking department. Jonnu Smith isn't a real inline blocker, and honestly not much of a slot blocker either. So they brought in Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who kind of fills the role that Braxton Berrios has been stuck occupying for the last couple of seasons. We saw Jonnu Smith do some of it. The ability to block on those crack toss plays, on those outside run plays, where Miami is hoping to have somebody from the slot that can either crack a defensive end or lead block down the field. They upgraded in both of those departments. Pharaoh Brown should be an upgrade as an inline wide tight end, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine should be an upgrade as an 11 personnel player, which kind of brings you back to being in those one tight end sets. And then on top of that, Miami seems to have this affinity, at least in 2023 they did, when they had a much more dynamic run game, for bringing out a different type of 21 personnel, not with Alec Ingold and whatever running back, but with two running backs. It was Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane that were helping you kind of create misdirection out of 21 personnel, and it might be a lighter pony look, they call it, but it still dictates it. The misdirection and window dressing of Mike McDaniel's offense, it makes it so much more difficult to tell where the play is going. And when you have two speedsters, I wouldn't be shocked if that Raheem Mostert role gets filled more by a Jalen Wright, and suddenly adding a gap, having someone you can trust in a Pharaoh Brown. Does it turn Jonnu Smith into more of a package player? Because I think a lot of Jonnu Smith's targets and his success down the stretch of the season, a lot of it came from what Miami's offense became and what it evolved into. But the reason it evolved into that is because they couldn't run up the middle because they did not have the interior offensive line and the horses there. They hopefully got better with James Daniels and Jonas Avainaya. then they couldn't run on the perimeter because they didn't have anyone that they could choose to. Didn't have anyone that they could run at on those crack toss plays. They didn't have players that they could choose to have block and insert. But now they've upgraded there with Nick Westbrook-Akine. They didn't have an inline tight end. They get better there with Pharaoh Brown. And I think the hope is Jonnu Smith doesn't have to come out as much when he's on the field. And for somebody who just had a breakout season by his standards, beating every single mark when it comes to receptions, targets, yards, and touchdowns of his career, I don't think that we're going to be looking at the same Dolphins team. I think this is one that hopes to move back towards maybe not having a tight end who's a threat per se, but being able to trust a big slot like Nick Westbrook-Akine, keep your four, real targets on the field, add a fifth guy in Pharaoh Brown who might be able to, come off the left side and help protect Patrick Paul, or, can help protect the right side with Austin Jackson and allow Tua to shuffle to his right in the pocket. I think the ability for Miami to work with hopefully an improved offensive line means that Jonnu Smith's production could be going down this year. I don't think that they see him as an every package, every down player. And in this Mike McDaniel offense, at least the versions of it that we've seen succeed and not the versions that were forced to adapt due to injuries, I don't know that he's going to match his production. With all that being said, there is a world where none of this ends up actually mattering. Jonnu Smith maybe gets his extension. These players, these new additions don't end up being as good as we hoped. And the Dolphins are a 2 tight end set team for a majority of the season. But I think the goal is what I pretty much outlined. I think going back to single tight end sets and allowing Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa to dictate defensive personnel is what made them the best version of themselves in 2022 and 2023, but also what could make them the best versions of themselves in 2025. I'm Tyler DeSena. That was another video from Finn's Focus. Make sure to subscribe for more because I got a lot more coming. I really appreciate it.